They had seen countless species fall before their might. But humanity was different. Commander Vortex stood tall on the bridge of the Imperial warship Crumbled, his black scales glistening under the dim, crimson light of the command deck. Before him, a holographic display projected the vastness of space, where a small fleet of human ships hovered near the border of Krolak-controlled space. Pathetic. The Krolak Dominion had ruled the galaxy for centuries, crushing any civilization that dared oppose them. Humanity was no different, or so Vortex believed. "Sir," a lieutenant growled, bowing slightly. "The humans have arrived for negotiations." Vortex sneered. He had studied these creatures, weak, primitive, with fragile bodies and short lifespans. They had no true warriors, no glory seekers. They were nothing but prey. "Send them in," he said with a dismissive flick of his clawed hand. The doors slid open with a hiss, and Captain Elias Carter stepped onto the warship's bridge. Unlike the Krolak, whose reptilian forms exuded raw physical strength, the human captain appeared unimpressive. His uniform was neat, his face unreadable, and his step steady. Vortex chuckled. "You've come to beg, I assume?" Elias didn't flinch. "No," he replied. "I've come to warn you." The Krolak officers burst into laughter, their guttural roars echoing through the bridge. Vortex smirked, baring his fangs. "Warn us? Oh, this is rich. What could your kind possibly threaten us with?" Elias exhaled slowly, his eyes cold. "You think we're weak. I understand why. You've conquered species who didn't fight back the way we do." Vortex folded his arms, amusement flickering in his yellow eyes. "You humans have nothing that could threaten the Dominion. You're outnumbered, outgunned, and outmatched." Elias tilted his head slightly. "Are we?" A pause. A quiet tension settled over the bridge. Vortex narrowed his eyes. Something about Carter's tone unsettled him. The human stepped forward. "You assume this meeting is about surrender. It isn't." He glanced at the holographic display of his fleet. "You've made a mistake, Commander. You pushed too far. And now, you'll see what happens when humanity is cornered." A sudden alarm blared across the bridge. Vortex's head snapped toward the screens. Red warnings flashed across the Krolak warship systems. "Sir," a lieutenant barked. "One of our dreadnoughts, it's turning against us." Vortex's eyes widened. He turned back to Elias, but the human was already walking away. "You should have listened," Elias said. Then he disappeared through the door. The last thing Vortex saw before the screen cut to static was the largest Krolak battleship firing upon its own fleet. Commander Vortex stormed across the command deck of the Krondar, his claws clicking against the cold metal floor. The alarms were still blaring, red lights flashing across the control panels as his officers scrambled for answers. "Report," he roared, his voice a deep growl of frustration. A junior officer, his scales trembling, stammered out the words. "Yes, sir. The Zarathus, our own dreadnought, has turned on us. It's firing at our fleet." Vortex snarled, slamming his fist into the console. The Zarathus was one of their most powerful warships, armed with planet-killer cannons, shielded against even the strongest of enemy attacks. How could it possibly have been hijacked? On the screen before him, his own fleet was in chaos. Krolak warships, once aligned in perfect formation, were now scattering as the Zarathus unleashed its arsenal. 2 destroyers had already been obliterated. How did they do this? Vortex demanded. We don't know," another officer stuttered. "There was no breach, no known cyber attack. It's as if the ship is acting on its own." Vortex's claws curled into a fist. He turned sharply toward the communications officer. "Get me the Emperor," he commanded. The officer hesitated. "Sir, the Emperor made it clear." "Now." Vortex roared, his patience wearing thin. A few seconds later, the massive war screen shifted, displaying the fearsome face of Emperor Zalvath, ruler of the Krolak Dominion. His scales were darker than most, his eyes like burning embers, his crown of bone spikes imposing even through a transmission. "Commander Vortek," the Emperor's voice rumbled. "I assume you have good reason to disturb me." Vortek saluted sharply, suppressing his unease. "Your Excellency, I regret to report that the Zarathus has been compromised. It has turned on us, and we do not know how." The Emperor frowned, his gaze narrowing. "Explain." We suspect humanity is responsible, but we do not understand how. The ship's systems were impenetrable. We have never faced this kind of." "You have never faced true war," the Emperor interrupted coldly. "You have crushed weaklings, broken primitive civilizations, but you have never fought a species that adapts." The weight of his words sank in. Vortek stiffened. "What are your orders, my Emperor?" The Emperor's gaze darkened. "Crush them. Make an example of Earth. Burn it to the ground if you must. Show them the price of defiance." The transmission cut off. Vortek exhaled sharply, his rage boiling over. He turned to his crew. "Prepare the fleet," he barked. "We are going to exterminate the humans." Meanwhile, on the human flagship Liberty's edge, Captain Elias Carter stood with his arms crossed, watching as a holographic display of the Krolak fleet flickered before him. The Zarathus, now under human control, continued its attack, decimating the enemy lines. Behind him, Dr. Lillian Hayes, chief engineer of the Terran Defense Initiative, was typing furiously on a console. "We've got full control of the ship," she confirmed. "Their security firewalls were laughable. Once we found the right entry point, we slipped in like ghosts." Elias smirked. "And they still don't know how we did it?" Lillian shook her head. "Nope. They're completely blind. Their ships are designed for conquest, not defense. That was their first mistake." "And their second?" Elias asked. Lillian grinned. "Underestimating us." The room was filled with officers, tacticians, military commanders, engineers. Each one bore the same determined expression. They all knew what was at stake. "All right," Elias said, stepping forward. "We bought ourselves time, but they're coming for Earth." We all knew this was going to happen. A murmur spread through the room. No one doubted what was coming. The full might of the Krolak Dominion would soon descend upon humanity's homeworld. "But they don't realize," Elias continued, his voice steady, "that we're ready for them." The murmur stopped. "We're not just going to defend Earth," Elias said, turning to face them all. "We're going to turn the tide. This isn't about survival anymore. It's about showing them who we really are." Silence hung for a moment, then a slow ripple of nods, determined expressions, clenched fists. Humanity had never sought war. But war had come for them. And now? Now, it was the Krolak who should be afraid. The Krolak Armada loomed in the void of space, a vast sea of warships stretching as far as the sensors could detect. The largest invasion fleet in galactic history had been assembled, hundreds of dreadnoughts, thousands of cruisers, and an uncountable number of smaller support vessels. Their destination, Earth. Commander Vortek stood on the bridge of the Krondar, his blood burning with anticipation. "Sir, all ships are in formation," an officer reported. "We will reach Earth's orbital perimeter in under 1 standard hour." Vortek allowed himself a smirk. The Emperor had given him one directive: make an example of the humans. Burn their world and erase their species. "This will be over quickly," he muttered. But something felt wrong. The humans had barely resisted the initial engagements. They had hijacked the Zarathus, yes, but that was a minor setback. Instead of launching counterattacks, instead of attempting to negotiate or retreat, they had gone silent. No distress signals. No desperate peace offers. Nothing. It was not how prey behaved. "Sir, we are detecting multiple energy signatures from Earth's surface," another officer reported. Vortek waved a dismissive claw. "Primitive planetary defenses. They won't last 5 minutes." Sir, the officer hesitated, eyes flicking across his display. Some of these readings are unusual. Vortek turned sharply. Clarify. The officer's scales paled. There are massive power fluctuations occurring beneath the planet's crust. Something is building up. On board the human flagship Liberty's Edge. Captain Elias Carter watched the incoming fleet from his command chair, his expression calm, despite the overwhelming odds. We're in position, said Dr. Lillian Hayes, her fingers flying over the control console. The Krolak are almost in range. Across the bridge, officers stood tense, the weight of history pressing down on them. This was the moment of truth. How long until they detect the bait? Elias asked. Any second now, Lillian replied. And when they do? She smirked. They're going to wish they'd left us alone. Back on the Krolak warship, Krondar. The first anomaly appeared on the tactical display as the fleet reached Earth's outer atmosphere. Sir. The officer's voice cracked with urgency now. We are detecting a gravitational distortion around the planet, impossible readings. What nonsense is this? Vortek growled. The display flickered, then suddenly changed. The entire space around Earth was shifting. And then, the Krolak saw it. Hundreds, no, thousands, of human warships materialized out of nowhere, their hulls shimmering as they emerged from what could only be described as folded space. They had been hiding in plain sight. It was an ambush. The battle ignites. Before the Krolak could react, the first human plasma rail cannons opened fire. Explosions rippled through the Krolak front line. We're under attack, a Krolak officer shrieked. Human ships everywhere. They should not have these numbers. Vortek bellowed, slamming his fist into the console. We outnumber them 10-1. Sir, they're using, the officer hesitated, horror spreading across his face. Tactical slipspace folds. They were hiding their fleet inside gravitational distortions. Vortek froze. Slipspace folds were impossible. No race had ever been able to use them without catastrophic failure. And yet, somehow, the humans had done it. His fleet was now caught in a perfect trap. Humanity's counterattack. Aboard the Liberty's Edge, Elias Carter watched as the first wave of the plan unfolded. The Krolak thought they were invincible, that their sheer numbers would ensure victory. They had never even considered that humanity might possess technology beyond their understanding. Elias leaned forward. Deploy Phase 2. The order was given. Suddenly, from the surface of the Earth, massive planetary cannons activated. Firing not at the Krolak fleet, but at the space between them. The distorted space folded again. Krolak ships vanished in an instant. Not destroyed. Erased. The Krolak's worst nightmare. Panic swept through the Krolak ranks. We are losing ships, an officer screamed. They are disappearing. Vortek's mind reeled. This wasn't war. This was annihilation. Fall back, he ordered, panic seeping into his voice. Get the Emperor on the comms. We need reinforcements. The Emperor's voice crackled through the transmission. Hold your ground, Commander, he said coldly. I will not tolerate retreat. But sire. Vortek pleaded. They have. Enough, the Emperor's eyes burned with fury. I command you to wipe them out. Or die trying. The Krolak fleet was in disarray. What should have been a swift annihilation of humanity had turned into a nightmare. The slipspace folds had torn massive gaps in their formations. Battleships disappeared into the void, their crews screaming into dead calms, before being swallowed by the unknown. And the humans weren't finished yet. Aboard the Krolak warship Krondar. Commander Vortek's mind raced as he struggled to make sense of the disaster unfolding before him. Every tactical advantage they thought they had was gone. Every weapon they relied on was countered. Every strategy they had used to crush civilizations before was useless. Vortek turned toward his officers, his voice a deep growl. Tell me, how is this possible? The comms officer's scales paled. Sir, the humans must have been developing this technology in secret for decades. Their ability to manipulate slip spaces. He hesitated. It's beyond anything we've ever seen. A cold shiver ran through Vortek. No species had ever been able to manipulate folded space like this. None, except the Krolak. And they had never shared that technology. Vortek's claws clenched. That means, they either stole it. The realization hit him like a plasma blast. Or they've surpassed us. Silence filled the command deck. It was an impossible thought, one the Krolak had never considered. And yet, here they were, watching their unstoppable fleet crumble. On board the human flagship Liberty's Edge. Captain Elias Carter watched the chaos unfold from the command deck, his hands clasped behind his back. The Krolak were breaking. For the first time in history, the galaxy's most feared empire was on the defensive. Phase 2 is a success, said Dr. Lillian Hayes, grinning as she tapped her display. We've erased nearly 30% of their fleet. The rest are scrambling. Elias nodded. And Phase 3? Lillian's grin widened. Right on schedule. Earth's next move, the unthinkable. The Krolak expected humanity to fight back. They expected resistance. They even prepared for a drawn-out war. What they never expected was for the humans to go on the offensive. As the battle raged in orbit, dozens of human strike teams deployed from hidden stations around the solar system. Their target? The Krolak High Command itself. The infiltration begins. Deep within the chaos of battle, an elite human strike team slipped through the Krolak fleet unnoticed. Their ship, coated in adaptive camouflage, moved like a shadow, heading straight for the Krolak's central command carrier. Leading them was Commander Jacob Thorne, a former Special Forces operative. We've got 3 minutes before they detect us, Thorne whispered into his calm move fast, move quiet. The team breached the hull of the Krolak carrier with precision charges, slipping into the corridors before the alarms even sounded. Inside, panicked Krolak officers rushed to coordinate their failing battle. They never saw the humans coming. Silencers. Blade kills. No wasted shots. One by one, the Krolak command was eliminated. And then they reached their true target. The message that changed everything. In the heart of the Krolak command center, Thorne activated a hacked transmission beacon. Across every Krolak warship, screens flickered. And then, Elias Carter appeared. This is Captain Elias Carter of the United Earth Fleet, he said, his voice calm yet unyielding. Your leaders have failed you. Your empire is crumbling. The Krolak Dominion is no longer in control. A hush fell over the Krolak fleet. The humans had infiltrated their command center. They had hijacked their communications. They had flipped the war in a matter of hours. And then Elias delivered the final blow. You have one chance, he said. Surrender, or be erased. Aboard the Krondar, Vortek's breaking point. Commander Vortek felt his throat tighten as he watched the impossible unfold. His command fleet was compromised. His leaders were dead or captured. And now, his own forces were hesitating. This is impossible, Vortek whispered. But it wasn't. Because humanity had done the impossible. The Emperor's response. In the depths of the Krolak homeworld, Emperor Zalvath watched the battle unfold through a massive war screen. His expression didn't change. His eyes didn't waver. But his clawed hand tightened on the armrest of his throne. He had underestimated them. And now? It was time for the Krolak to respond. Cliffhanger ending. Humanity has turned the tide. The Krolak fleet is in chaos. Their command structure is compromised. Their empire has never been weaker. But the war is far from over. And the Emperor has one final move to play. The Krolak Empire had never known defeat. Not like this. Not at the hands of a species they had mocked, dismissed, underestimated. And now? They had been backed into a corner. But the Krolak were at their most dangerous when cornered. Aboard the Krolak warship Krondar, Commander Vortek's mind was unraveling. The battle had become a nightmare. They had outnumbered the humans 10-1. Yet their fleet was shattered. Their command structure was compromised. And worst of all, their warriors hesitated. Across the fleet, Krolak officers were freezing in fear, watching in shock as human warships outmaneuvered them, as human strike teams infiltrated their strongest ships. The unstoppable empire was breaking apart. Vortek snarled, slamming his clawed fist against the command console. "Pull the remaining ships into defensive formation," he barked. "We regroup. We counterattack." His officers didn't move. Vortek whirled around, his slitted yellow eyes blazing. That was an order. One of his officers, his scales pale, finally spoke the unthinkable. "Sir," he whispered, voice trembling. "Some of our fleets are retreating. The Krolak's worst fear, internal collapse." "Retreat? Krolak, don't retreat." The words burned in Vortek's mind. They had crushed hundreds of civilizations under their rule. Entire species had submitted without a fight. And now, their own soldiers were running. He clenched his claws so hard they drew blood. "This is cowardice," Vortek roared. "I will have them executed." A sudden, eerie silence fell across the warship's bridge. The Emperor was on the comms. Aboard the Krolak homeworld, the Emperor's wrath. Emperor Zalvath was silent as he watched the ruins of his fleet on the war screens. His empire was fracturing. His commanders were failing. But he had one final move to play. The humans thought they had won. But they had made a grave mistake. They had underestimated what the Krolak would do to survive. "Activate the Zirian protocol," the Emperor commanded. Silence filled the throne room. His officers stared at him. The Zirian protocol was forbidden. It was a last resort. Because if unleashed, it wouldn't just destroy humanity. It would destroy everything. The officer hesitated, his claws trembling. "Sire, if we do this, we..." Zalvatha's glare silenced him. "Humanity thinks they are strong," the Emperor said, his voice cold. "Let's see if they can survive what's coming. Earth's final stand." Aboard the Liberty's Edge, Captain Elias Carter watched the Krolak fleet begin falling apart. The battle was turning into a rout. "Commander Thorne, report," Elias called over comms. Inside the Krolak command ship, Commander Jacob Thorne and his team had secured control. "We've taken the bridge," Thorne said, breathing hard. "Krolak leadership is either dead or captured. Their forces are crumbling." Then, his voice cut off. A moment of silence. Then, Thorne's voice returned. Shaken. "Elias," he said. "We have a problem. The unthinkable plan." In the heart of the Krolak command ship, Thorne and his team stood over a holographic display. A countdown had begun. 1 hour. 1 hour until Zirian activation. Thorne's voice was grim. "Elias, they've activated something called the Zirian protocol. If I'm reading this right, it's a self-replicating, galaxy-wide weapon." Elias froze. "Defined weapon." Thorne swallowed. "It's a planetary eraser," he said. "It's designed to wipe out all life in an entire star system. And it's already counting down." A cold chill swept across the human command deck. If the countdown hit 0, Earth wouldn't just be attacked. It would be gone. The final decision. Elias clenched his jaw. "Can we stop it?" Thorne hesitated. "Not conventionally," he admitted. "The Krolak built this thing as a failsafe. Once activated, it can't be turned off." Elias exhaled slowly. "Then we have one option," he said. Lillian Hayes looked at him sharply. "You're not saying..." Elias nodded. "We go for the source," he said. We take the fight straight to the Krolak homeworld. A hushed silence filled the bridge. No one had ever dared strike at the heart of the Krolak Empire. It was suicide. But Elias knew one thing. If they didn't act now, there would be no Earth left to save. He turned to his crew, his eyes burning with resolve. "Send the order," he said. "All human forces, prepare for the final battle." The countdown continued. 58 minutes. 58 minutes until Earth ceased to exist. 58 minutes until humanity was wiped from history. And yet, despite the overwhelming odds, despite the looming apocalypse, the humans did not surrender. Because they had one last move to make. Aboard the human flagship Liberty's Edge, Captain Elias Carter stood at the center of the bridge, his jaw clenched. The Xerian protocol was unstoppable, unless they destroyed the source. That meant doing the unthinkable. A direct assault on the Krolak homeworld. No species had ever dared it. Because no species had ever survived it. But Elias wasn't just any commander. And humanity wasn't just any species. He turned to his crew, his voice steady, despite the chaos. "You all know what's at stake," he said. "This isn't just about Earth. This is about who we are." Silence filled the bridge. Eyes locked on him. He let his words sink in. "They think we're weak," he continued. "They think we're nothing more than prey." He let the rage build in his voice. "But today, we prove them wrong." Murmurs rippled across the bridge. "Today," Elias declared, "we take the fight to them." A cheer erupted across the command deck. Humanity's final gamble had begun. The assault on the Krolak homeworld. The fleet moved fast, launching from the ruins of the battlefield toward the Krolak's capital world, Boker 7. Every warship, every fighter, every available human soldier was deployed. There was no plan B. They won, or they died. Aboard the Krolak warship Krondar, Commander Vortek watched in disbelief. The humans were coming for them. "Sir," an officer stammered, "they're launching a full-scale assault on Boker 7. Vortek's blood ran cold. This wasn't how the war was supposed to go. The humans were supposed to run. They were supposed to beg. Instead, they were charging straight into the heart of the Empire. He turned sharply. "Get me the Emperor." A moment later, Emperor Zalvatha's image flickered onto the war screen. "My Emperor," Vortek began, his voice shaking slightly, "the humans, they're coming. They're attacking Boker 7 directly." For the first time, Zalvath hesitated. Just for a fraction of a second. Then his eyes hardened. "Then we will crush them here," he said coldly. "Every last one." But Vortek wasn't so sure anymore. The infiltration of the throne room. 32 minutes left. Inside the palace fortress of Boker 7, alarms blared as 3 human strike teams breached the heavily fortified stronghold. Leading them was Commander Jacob Thorne. "We're in," Thorne whispered into his comm, moving toward the throne room now. The halls were lined with Krolak elite guards, the Emperor's best warriors. But the humans were faster. A well-placed shock charge sent the first wave crashing to the ground. A second team cut the power, plunging the palace into darkness. The final team secured the command hub, shutting down the Krolak's planetary defense grid. The Krolak's last line of defense was gone. And the throne room was just ahead. The final confrontation. Inside the Grand Throne Chamber, Emperor Zalvath sat motionless, watching the battle unfold on the screens before him. His empire was collapsing. The unstoppable Krolak Dominion, the most feared force in the galaxy, was falling. The doors slammed open. Thorne and his team stormed in, weapons raised. Zalvath did not move. He simply stared at them, his burning eyes locking onto Thorne. "You think you've won," the Emperor said calmly. Thorne stepped forward, his rifle steady. "It's over," he said. "Call off the Xerian protocol." Zalvatha's lips curled into a smirk. "You still don't understand, do you?" he murmured. He gestured toward the screen. The countdown was at 10 minutes. Even if you kill me, he said, Earth dies. A hush fell over the room. Thorne's grip tightened on his rifle. For the first time in the war, humanity was out of time. Then his earpiece crackled. Elias to Thorne, the captain's voice came through. We found another way. Thorne's eyes widened. You can stop it? A pause. Not exactly, Elias admitted. But we can redirect it. Thorne exhaled. Do it. The end of the Krolak Empire. In orbit above Voker 7, Lillian Hayes and her team worked frantically to hack the Xerian weapons core. All right, she muttered. Almost there. Elias stood behind her, watching the countdown. 4 minutes left. Come on, Lillian, he murmured. Then, her screen flashed green. Got it, she shouted. She slammed a final command into the system. And then? The Xerian energy pulse redirected. Not toward Earth. But toward Voker 7. Aboard the Krolak throne room. Alarms blared. A warning flashed across the screens. Impact imminent. The Emperor's smirk disappeared. Thorne stared at him. You were right, Thorne said. Earth won't survive. He leaned in closer. But neither will you. And then? The weapon fired. The Krolak Empire falls. The Xerian pulse tore through Voker 7, consuming the entire capital world in blinding light. The once mighty seat of the Empire was erased. And with it? The Krolak Dominion was no more. Final scene. Aboard the Liberty's Edge, a deep silence filled the bridge. The Krolak were gone. The war was over. Elias Carter exhaled. It's done, he whispered. The galaxy had changed. In the span of a few weeks, the Krolak Dominion, once the most feared empire in the known universe, had fallen. The Xerian Protocol, their ultimate weapon, had been redirected and erased the very foundation of their power, their homeworld, Voker 7. And now, the world was left to wonder what humanity would do with the power they had taken. Aboard the human flagship Liberty's Edge, Captain Elias Carter stood at the helm, his eyes staring out at the remains of the Krolak fleet. It was hard to grasp, still. The Krolak were gone. But the cost had been tremendous. Humanity had won, but at what price? Behind him, the hum of the ship's engines filled the quiet of the bridge. Lillian, he called softly, what's the damage? Dr. Lillian Hayes was at a nearby console, her face illuminated by the soft glow of the screen. She turned, her expression more tired than before. Over 60% of our fleet is either damaged or destroyed. We lost thousands of soldiers in the assault on Voker 7. She paused, a sad look crossing her face. But, we did it. We're still here. We won. Elias nodded slowly, looking out at the drifting wreckage of Krolak warships. There were no cheers, no celebrations. Because victory didn't come without sacrifice. On the surface of Earth. Back on Earth, the aftermath was just as profound. Cities had been damaged during the brief Krolak attack, and millions had lost their lives. The war had not been without cost, and the human toll was heavy. Yet, there was hope, a new dawn for a world that had never truly known peace. The people of Earth were united, but there was still a long road ahead. Humanity had survived, but now it had to rebuild. A gathering of leaders. In a newly restored United Nations building in New York City, world leaders gathered in the aftermath of the war. They had defeated the Krolak, but the next battle wasn't about war. It was about rebuilding. It was about ensuring the future of Earth wasn't spent in the shadow of war, but in the light of peace. Captain Elias Carter, Dr. Lillian Hayes, and Commander Jacob Thorne sat among the leaders, each one taking their seat not as a victor, but as someone who had witnessed what the cost of victory truly was. The first discussion was clear. How would Earth lead? Would it rise to its newfound power, holding the galaxy in fear like the Krolak had? Or would it embrace a different future, One where humanity didn't dominate through strength, but through unity and understanding? Elias, standing before the assembly, made it clear what the choice was. We've seen what absolute power can do, he began, his voice strong but calm. The Krolak believed that they were above everyone else, that their might made them right. And look where it got them, destroyed. He paused, letting the words sink in.